There you go, Craig. If you want to introduce yourself and tell us today about Phospholutions.
Yeah, so I'm Craig Dick. I'm VP of Sales and Marketing with Phospholutions. Little history on myself. Grew up on a farm in Nebraska. Been in really the fertilizer industry my whole career. Spent 10 years at Calcium Products. 10 years living in Iowa. I'm now back in Nebraska. Live about 40 minutes from my dad's farm. Manage our sales and marketing throughout our company, and been with the company since 2023 when we launched Riseazorb. As you guys all know, you're investors in our company, and we appreciate that. And it's gone very well here over the last couple of years. We've seen good adoption throughout the channel, and so love to get your feedback on not only our current presentation, but would also like to wrap up today by getting your input and ideas on how we can develop a special program for Ag Ventures Alliance members to try Riseazorb. So with that, I'll jump into, I've got a few slides here. We'll go through just kind of overview of the product, some of the trial history, how it works. So if you have any questions along the way, feel free to jump in and ask. Does that work for what you're thinking, Lauren?
That should work. If you want to try
Okay.
to screen share, we'll let her go.
All right.
Should be coming up. There you go.
Okay. So we'll start by kind of just discussing here the problem that we're trying to solve with Riseazorb. And the real challenge with phosphates is they're highly reactive. And upon application of the soil, especially a product like MAP, will tie up in the soil very quickly, often within 30 days. And up to 10% or up to 90% of that product can be bound in the soil and unavailable to the crop. That does vary depending on your soil type. Typically, you'll see anywhere from 10 to 30% in the literature, but it is very challenging then to get that phosphate back into your corn plant. So with Riseazorb, what we've done is our technology is bound to phosphate fertilizer during the manufacturing process. What that allows us to do then is when it's applied to the soil, it enables up to twice as much applied phosphate to be taken up by the crop. And it keeps it from being bound in the soil so that we can essentially double uptake of traditional phosphates. So Riseazorb 8390 is our product, and it was developed as a replacement for MAP or DAP dry phosphate fertilizer. Again, it's a patented technology that was developed at Penn State University, and it is a blend of metal oxides that, when incorporated into the phosphate manufacturing process, adsorbs the phosphate to it and keeps it from tying up in the soil. This works independent of soil chemistry, so independent of pH, works independent of your soil type, and works independent of P levels in the soil. It's also not a biological, so it's very consistent in its performance across farms. And again, lastly, what we're doing is we're helping to make phosphorus more available to the plant through the growing season. And this adsorption, desorption works off of chemical concentration gradients. So what that means is for phosphate to be taken up by the plant, it has to be in the soil solution. And as the plant is growing, it pulls phosphate out of the soil solution. And when that happens, phosphate is released from Riseazorb into that soil solution. So essentially, we are being more efficient at feeding the crop throughout the growing season. As I mentioned, it's a replacement for MAP or DAP. And so there's really no difference in handling. Riseazorb is made at large scale MAP monoammonium phosphate manufacturing plants. And really the only difference you see in the product is we have a much lower salt index. And so for guys that are doing dry strip till, that equates to better plant health better plant health and being able to cover more acres in a day. and I'll talk more about that here in a little bit. So backing up just a little bit on development of Rhizosorb. So again, I mentioned it was developed by Penn State University by one of a world-renowned horticultural researcher who developed the technology to control phosphate movement in soil, to study root architecture. In 2016, Hunter Swisher, our CEO, licensed those patents and founded Phospholutions. He spent a couple years trying to figure out how to turn this product into a product that would be useful for row crop agriculture. And in 2018, they started small plot studies. And then in 2021, those learnings turned into on-farm trials. Over the last 4 years, we've conducted hundreds of trials. And in 2023, we launched the product commercially. So I mentioned those trials, and that's really what the team has been working on here, really the last 4 years. Hundreds of small plot trials over multiple locations, multiple replications to study how the product works. We've also done land grant university trials with Penn State, which has culminated into Penn State endorsing Rhizosorb as an EEF, which what that means is in the state of Pennsylvania, growers that are in the USDA CSP program can apply for grant rebates. So between the CSP and EQIP program, they can get up to $65 an acre in federal rebates for using Rhizosorb. And then lastly, as I mentioned, the 4 years of on-farm trials, which all those trials were a minimum of 20 acres and conducted in a side-by-side. So I mentioned Rhizosorb is really effective across a wide range of soils. And so this is a snapshot of many of those on-farm trials. And so whether it's a sandy, silty, clay soil, what we see is really no difference in performance from grower standard practice of using MAP. Depending on your p-value of your soil, we see improved performance to no difference to traditional MAP programs. And again, across a wide range of pHs, we make phosphorus more available to the crop. And then last year, this is a new data set for us. Across all of our on-farm trials, we conducted tissue samples as comparisons and definitively showed that Rhizosorb, even with applying 50% less P2O5, is matching monoammonium phosphate's full rates at plant uptake. So those on-farm trials have been conducted from the Western Corn Belt all the way to the East Coast, and most of our trials have been in Iowa. But across those trials, for 4 years in a row, we see the same or greater yields, with again applying 50% less phosphate applied as Rhizosorb 839.0. So what does that mean for you guys as growers? With Rhizosorb or with monoammonium phosphate, if your application was around 100 pounds per acre, that would typically cost a grower around $40 per acre. With Rhizosorb, to apply 50% less phosphate, we'd apply 66 pounds of product, which directly equates to an upfront 10% cost savings, or $4 per acre. And with Rhizosorb, on average, we see around a 1.5% yield increase, which translates to an additional $16 in revenue. So the average grower that has used Rhizosorb over the last 4 years typically sees around a $20 ROI. And with the whole tariff situation we're in right now, the unfortunate thing is it doesn't look like phosphates are getting cheaper anytime in the near future. So trying to figure out how you can save money but yet maintain your yields with phosphate is going to be a big challenge for many growers in the near future. So I mentioned some of the EEF benefits, but we have some additional sustainability benefits. We conducted a life cycle analysis on Rhizazorb, which shows a 45% reduction in carbon compared to MAP. And so what that could potentially mean is if this 45Z program that's been floated about here for the last couple of years ever comes to fruition for low carbon fuels, it could directly translate into lower CI scores for switching to Rhizazorb. And again, some additional income on a per acre basis. And then lastly, for impaired watersheds, Rhizazorb has shown up to 78% reduction in surface runoff of phosphorus into waterways. And so we're actually talking with Iowa Soybean Association currently on doing some trials next fall because they are very interested in solving some of the water quality issues for the state of Iowa, and they've been very excited about Rhizazorb. Lastly, with Rhizazorb, this is a program that's going into its second year. We call it the Rhizazorb Grower Guarantee. It's a warranty program that growers who apply up to 200 acres or a minimum of 200 acres of Rhizazorb to corn or soybeans can enroll in. And if their yields don't meet their 10-year APH, they can receive up to $40 per acre in a warranty payment. Last year, this program was really successful, and we actually only had one grower who yields didn't meet his 10-year APH, and he will be repurchasing Rhizazorb because he felt that it wasn't a product performance, it was a seed issue as well as a flooding issue on that field. So it was really independent of Rhizazorb's performance. So kind of just summarizing again what we're doing with Rhizazorb. MAP and DAP is very inefficient. Much of what you apply is going to get tied up in your soil. It's going to be unavailable for crop uptake. With Rhizazorb, we can double the efficiency of phosphates. Hundreds of trials across many states. We've also, through long-term trials, have shown that we have zero impact to that phosphate pool of your soil, meaning we're not pulling down your soil phosphate numbers, because with Rhizazorb, we are meeting the crop demands for phosphate. There's no negative impact to your soil P values. This directly translates to an upfront cost savings without a reduction in the amount of nutrients you're feeding your crop. And then there's a host of sustainability benefits that we're not asking growers to pay more for. It's built into the product. So with that, I'd really like to get everybody's input on not only what you've heard, but how could we craft a program that your members would adopt to help lower the risk for you all to try Rhizazorb for next season? I realize everybody's busy this season, so this would be a fall 25 program for the 26 crop year.
Good morning. This is Ben Ricci. I'm a newbie to this. Lauren invited me, so apologize if my questions duplicate material you covered prior. You just answered my first question. You can obviously fall apply it as a granular. Is that correct?
Correct. Any way you've been applying your dry phosphates currently, you can simply switch out your MAP or DAP or triple superphosphate for Rhizazorb, and it's going to plug right in at just a slightly lower use rate.
Got it. Where's the product manufactured? Because it'd be no problem to get a few loads of it and give it a try, because I handle my own dry fertilizer.
Yes, so great question. So at Phospholutions, we partner with manufacturers worldwide to manufacture the product. We import it into the country, move it in through into distribution centers, which ultimately get moved out to retailers. So our nearest distribution center currently at Iowa is, we have tote bags in Clinton, Iowa. We have River Terminal in Ottawa, Iowa. But we also have a handful of retailers in Iowa that are currently handling the product. So depending on your situation and where you're at, we can either you can go down to your local retailer and pick it up, or we may have to potentially work to get you product direct if there's not a retailer in your backyard that's willing to handle it.
Got it. I will tell you this, when you say the word retailer, I think of paying for a lot of people in fancy shirts with new white pickups, and I can't afford all their bad mistakes. I'd prefer to get just loads send 150 tons to my door. We'll give it a spin.
We can for Ag Ventures Alliance members, we're definitely open to doing that. Just as a side note, I don't disagree with your comments, Ben. However, unfortunately, the retailers do have a lot of the last leg of the infrastructure to move fertilizer, large volumes of fertilizer. So as a company, it is our main directive to work through the normal distribution channels. But setting that aside, happy to work directly with Ag Ventures Alliance members.
Yeah, understood. But my goal is to see my fertilizer dealer on the back of my milk carton some morning. Okay, now I'm going to go full skeptical on you. So you opened up saying that fertilizer, the phosphorus, is, not available right away, and that opens me to the idea that you have residual fertilizer in year 2, 3, 4 after application. I put on your product. I'm thinking it would be best tried in a low fertility environment. Anytime I pick up a new farm, it's always a fertility desert. It'd be easy to go out into something that we farmed for 100 years and is in the high or very high category and cut back for a few years, not experience any yield loss or from changing in the rate. I generally, and I apologize, I'm working out while I do this so I can multitask. We spend about $50 to $60 per corn acre on phosphorus now. And, if we cut that in half with your product, that gives us a lot of room, depending on your pricing. But how do I know that your product just isn't relying on the availability of residual fertilizer and it looks great for 2 or 3 years while you recover your R&D, and then I'm left with the fertility desert in 3 years? And
Yeah,
I don't mean that as mean-spirited as it sounds, but I just want to cut to the punch.
Ben, I appreciate the question, and that's really the number one question agronomists ask us. And so this is something we've been studying intently. So number one, with Rhizazorb, we are meeting as long as our rate recommendation, when you make your initial rate calculation, you're quantifying for plant removal, and then you are reducing that by 50% in applying Rhizazorb. We're going to meet that crop's demand for phosphate with the applied amount of Rhizazorb. Therefore, we won't be drawing soil P values down. If for instance, you're growing 250 bushel corn and you're only putting on 50 pounds of P2O5, you can't cut that 50% and expect to have a good result. So number one, we want to make the right recommendation. Number two, this is something we've been studying intently. So we are going into our 5th year of small plot studies. And these are in addition to the 5 years at Penn State where we've done similar studies. We have 8 locations, 6 replications per trial. And what this has shown is we are able to feed the crop without drawing soil P values down. So in this trial, we've been comparing a plot of a full rate of MAP versus a 50% rate of phosphate as applied with Rhizazorb. And while, as expected, we do see a little seasonal variation in the actual test value, statistically, there's no change in that P value of the soil. And while we're doing that, we are also meeting that crop need and matching or exceeding the grower standard practice of the full rate of P2O5 for yield. So number one question we get asked, Ben, and it's something that we are intently studying. when you further look into the literature of phosphate drawdown, so one thing you said was, I think you said what we do with our phosphate is we keep it from tying up in the soil so that it is more plant available, so that we don't have to draw from the soil pool. If you over apply phosphate with a build and hold scenario that many guys have done for the past few years, the university trial data shows that it can take up to 10 years for you to get that phosphate back. So it is a very slow process of getting that phosphate unlocked out of your soil. And so what we're trying to do is to avoid a very expensive scenario of applying phosphate, having the majority of it tie up and be tightly bound in your soil in as little as 30 days, and then potentially taking up to 10 years for that product to be available. Additionally, a lot of the research shows that up to 6% of that applied phosphate in a build and hold scenario can be lost to leaching or runoff. So it's a very, very cost ineffective way to manage phosphate the way we're currently doing it. And at today's high prices, it just really doesn't make sense going forward. So with Rhizosorb, you're applying slightly less product per acre, and you should see roughly a 10% upfront cost savings. So I think you said $50 an acre. You're going to see immediate $5 per acre savings.
Okay, quick follow-up question. If I over apply your product, it doesn't bank in the soil then because it's available. It might go away. So it'd be careful not to overuse the product, correct?
Yeah, there's really no need to over apply it. Certainly, if you're in a scenario where you're on a low P testing soil and you need to apply more to get to critical test value, which we would recommend following university recommendations of building to a minimum test value of 20 to 25 ppm. But as you can see from our trials, in low P values, we are keeping phosphate more available, and we actually see an outsized yield increase in those low test values. As you get up into what's considered high to excessive, where phosphate is no longer your limiting factor, that yield increase goes away. Because if you already have excess phosphate, getting more phosphate in the plant doesn't equal more yield. And much research has shown that you actually get luxury consumption with phosphate, meaning if you have high P values and you're still applying phosphate, it's not going to drive more yield. It's going to drive a bigger plant, more biomass, but it won't drive yield. And so again, if you're in that, say 30 ppm range with Rhizosorb, one, you've got enough phosphate in the soil. You can meet the removal demands with Rhizosorb, so you don't pull those test values down, and you've liberated some cash in your fertilizer program to roll into another fertilizer that may drive yield. Maybe that's more potash, sulfur, a humic, or micronutrients, something else that's going to drive yield.
Thank you. I'm going to go to listen only mode. My crew's coming in a few minutes, and I'll keep the earbuds in, but listen. Thank you.
Great questions. Appreciate it. Thanks, Ben.
Anybody else have questions? In the meantime, I do have one. What if a guy is applying heavy livestock manures and that? Would there be advantage to applying this with livestock manure? Would it help release some of the livestock benefits?
Potentially, but I don't have any research or trials that would justify a benefit or to that. So again, if you're using a lot of manure and you have high P values, I guess I would ask, is part of your program traditionally using dry phosphates? And if it is, we could certainly replace those and provide some additional value. But in terms of releasing more manure or more phosphates from the soil, I just don't have research to justify that scenario.
Okay, anybody else have questions, or feel free to unmute yourself and jump in. There you go, Joe.
Yeah, Joe Rao here.
I got a question. Go ahead.
I guess, do you know right off the top of your head who would be some distributor locations in northern Iowa close by. I don't farm a lot of acres, so I don't have my own, I guess, handling other than truck capacity anyway for dry fertilizer. And then two, I guess, are you looking at, with the reduced rate and feeding the plant as it needs, working with the agronomist to develop my scripts? Are you going to more of just a flat rate based on yield potential anyway to calculate the amount of Rhizosorb to apply, or what's the methodology there anyway?
Yeah, so I'll answer the rate question first. No, Rhizosorb essentially is a plug and play for MAP, and I would say in the program that you've been using on your farm for success the last few years. So if you're variable rating, you can continue to do that. Typically, when doing rates, the best recommendation is building your phosphate to around a 25 ppm value, and then applying phosphate based off of removal rates. So 0.35 bushels or 0.35 pounds of P2O5 per bushel typically is the recommendation. And that varies from university to university, but that's fairly typical. And so, if you're above a 25 ppm, you should just be applying removal rates, and your agronomist should be able to take your yield maps and develop a variable rate script based off of where you're pulling your yields from, and then also layer in your soil test values to make sure that in the areas that are low testing, we can apply a little more to meet the need there, and in the high areas, we're not over applying. Northern Iowa, there's a number of retailers. I guess it depends on where you're at in Northern Iowa, north central, northeast. Maybe give me a little more direction on where you're at there, Joe.
Mason City region, north central.
Yeah, north central, Mason City region. I don't have one off the top of my head. I can get back to you on that, but Lynn Co-op Oil, Cedar County Co-op, talking to a couple others up in that area, Nexus. So let me get with our Iowa regional manager and get back to you. But number of retailers I know we're either currently talking to or they have taken some Rhizosorb in to test for themselves in their backyard.
Yeah, I'm using an independent this year and a co-op both, but I could probably do a tote bag scenarios anyway as a trial standpoint just to get started.
Yeah, happy to work with any of your preferred retailers, or again, to Ben's comments, for you guys that do a lot of direct purchase. For Ag Ventures Alliance members, would be happy to work with you direct.
Jason, did you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, I had a couple questions. Like Lauren asked, we have turkeys, so I spread about 4 tons of turkey manure. I'm pretty high on my phos levels already, but I do know from studying some of the soil things with Kinsey and some of the other guys, I know that phosphorus is tying up to my calcium levels, which are over 2,000 parts per million in the soil. You're saying that this will not loosen that from that bond?
Yeah, so we consider Rhizosorb more of a sponge for phosphate, more than a hammer. So some of the biologicals, some of the humics can pull phosphate from that soil constituencies, but Rhizosorb is only going to grab free phosphate that's in the soil solution if it's in excess and hold on to it. So
if I used citric acid, or there's a product of carboxylic acids I'm using this year, if I can tear that, and there's NutriCharge, which is another acid, if I can tear that loose from the calcium and have your product present, will it then attach on to that phosphorus bond?
Very much so. And so we normally don't go into a lot of the background history, but We did initially start Rhizazorb as a soil amendment. We didn't see very consistent responses when applied with fertilizer, but in instances of high P values on manure, we did see some benefit there. Long term, we have some aspirations to have a manure type product, and potentially down the road, we could maybe reach out to Ag Ventures Alliance members for some of that testing and trial work. But today we're just not set up supply chain wise to move lots of bulk powdery dusty Rhizazorb on farm. So more to come on that, Joe. But we could certainly try some strip trials with Rhizazorb 839.0 and see what happens there. But without a lot of trial data, I can't tell you how it's going to perform.
Is it a charged ion in that it's attaching on to that phosphorus, or is it more of a polymer that it's clawing it and grabbing it?
No, it's what we call an activated metal oxide, meaning essentially it is a charged metal lattice work. So in the process of activation, it becomes electrostatically charged, positively charged, to hold on to that -3 phosphate.
Okay.
It is not a polymer. It's not a biological.
It becomes a neutral charge on that phosphorus. So does that now enable that phosphorus to slide, leach?
No, it's going to hold that phosphate, in that soil basically in a state where it's not bound, and as the phosphorus is pulled from the soil solution, it will then release and try to keep in equilibrium with the soil solution a phosphate balance. But we call it chemical concentration gradient, and that's typically how phosphorus moves. So as in our research trials, we've shown 84% reduction in leaching. So essentially what we're showing is that it's keeping phosphorus not only in a more available state, but less of it is leaving your field.
Okay. I guess the last question I have is, what's the half-life on it?
Great question. It's something our R&D team is currently studying. I don't have a good answer for you on it now, but more to come on that.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and fire away. Appreciate the direct answers, Craig. Kent, feel free to jump on.
Any work on like grass seed or other minor crops, not just corn and beans?
Yeah, great question. So Rhizazorb initially was a turf product, and we sold it up and down the East Coast to golf courses, and still have a couple of those customers that even buy the new product. We also had a trial last year in the Pacific Northwest on grass seed. We've had trials in Canada on canary grass. We've done some on wheat. And again, at the end of the day, it's more efficient phosphorus. And so we have seen a lot of benefits in terms of very similar yield responses to corn. So, a couple percentage points of yield increase. It's the crop we normally do a lot of grow room studies. So initial testings is with ryegrass, and got a number of trials that I've seen that show more biomass of growth, and all kinds of different trials. Those trials typically aren't taken to yield though, so I can't comment on in terms of yield, but yeah, it does tend to show similar response across those small grains as it does corn.
Okay. I don't know if you're interested, but maybe getting some trial stuff out here in Oregon. If you want to contact me, I can set you up with a couple folks who do that stuff, the local co-op, as well as the guy who does a lot of research for the grassy commissions out here, but we're dealing with the bill was struck down or didn't make it to the floor, but they're wanting us to report all fertilizer usage now out here. So I think it's just a matter of time before
So
we're
one of the
starting to get
challenges,
hit.
of course, in that part of the country is those soils are lighter and can get acidic very fast. And so applying less MAP on a per acre basis would result in less acidification. So, and then of course the lower salt index should be value add. So yeah, definitely Kent, very interested in, getting in touch with you and having further conversations on that.
All right, thank
Would
you.
that be the same formulation then as here in the Midwest, or?
Yeah. And we've got a number of trials going out there right now. So, with some different people in different crops, but, yeah, nothing very specific, I think, to what you're talking about, Kent. So, look forward to following up with you, after this.
And then retail outlets out there in Oregon, you got kind of the same situation as here. You'd have some available for like Kent, and I know we got several growers out there. So
Yeah, Platinum Co-op's taking some product in. We handful of others. Again, I'd have to go through my list, which I don't have in front of me right now. But we do have a distributor out there who's also working to move it into other retailers.
Okay, Pradham's who I was thinking of, and then Pacific Ag Research was the other guy who's
Keith, I say you're unmuted. You got a question for Craig?
Yeah, I'm just wondering about any soil testing that you're doing. If you're doing some extended testing, multiple years, by the time you get to 3, 4, 5 years, the soil tests start to mean something in comparison.
Yes. Yeah. So we are doing long-term soil testing. Not only at university, but in multiple location small plot trials that are highly controlled. And again, what we've seen so far, at least year 4 going into year 5, is no change to those soil test values. On farm, on one of our farms in Nebraska with a commercial grower, he's trialed the product 3 years in a row. He's actually seen his P values come up slightly. And so he is a strip tiller, and he's growing like 300 bushel corn typically. And what we think maybe is happening there, and again, our R&D team is trying to validate this scientifically, but having been an agronomist, what I think is happening is because we are keeping more phosphorus in an available form and less is getting bound in the total P pool, which you can test for. Most don't because it's a very expensive test. But most soils, if you test that total P pool, you're talking thousands of pounds of phosphate just locked up in that soil. It's never going to be available. So what we think is happening is we're having less of that phosphate disappear into that total P pool that's not showing up on our Bray 1, Bray 2 tests. And so as we keep more phosphorus available over multiple years, that is why I believe we're seeing that growers' P values come up.
Great, thank you.
Joe, I see you're unmuted again. Nope. Any other questions for Craig? There's Jason again.
I got another one. So if you're looking at P values, are you looking at other values in the soil? And have you noticed a decrease or an increase in any of those other values where maybe that plant is taking that P in rather than something else, like you said, creating that biomass if you got an excess already?
Yeah,
Phosphorus and sulfur will fight each other.
Yeah, sulfur is the number one antagonist of phosphorus. So if you have very high P values, Jason, I think you said, you're in the hundreds. Best thing you can do is pound a lot of extra sulfur to it, because phosphate outcompetes sulfur. Excess phosphate also decreases zinc and copper uptake, which directly translates into reduced plant health. more fungal diseases, more bacterial problems, and that's directly from literature. So what we've seen in our testing, and I'd have to go back and look at the data. It's been a while since I've looked at it, but typically when we do a full soil analysis and a full tissue analysis, we're seeing increased beneficial nutrients like copper, zinc, manganese, nickel, sulfur. Those tend to increase as well in the Rhizosorb trials, while things like sodium and heavy metals tend to be reduced. So again, not huge values, but numerically different for sure. So Jason, if that's something you want to take a deep dive into, I'd probably want to get you scheduled to talk with our technical agronomist on that.
Sorry, I always want to know the why. We all got sold on stuff that is great and moves our farm forward, and then we find out 5 years later that we took steps backwards. So thank you for answering the questions.
Yeah, and on that, 5 steps or 5 years of data, 10 years of data. Again, we're going to continue these long-term trials, and so again, we're going into year 5. No negative benefits so far. At least in the short term, the way I look at it is, you could get started, save some money in the next year or two on phosphate prices as they're elevated due to CVDs and tariffs. We get a year 6, 7, 8 down the road. You could switch course then without really seeing a negative benefit. So again, I want to reiterate, to date, we've been looking at this a very long time and have not seen any negative issues with Rhizosorb. And lastly, it's not about how much phosphate's in your soil. It's about how much can we get into your plant. And with Rhizosorb, we're applying less per acre, direct cost savings, and matching traditional phosphorus in plant uptake.
Is there information as to what metal you're using?
It's a blend of different metals, metal oxides.
Okay. Thank you.
Briefly touch on just application and handling as far as any observations, absorbing water and turning into a wet goo, like some products we deal with, compatibility, say, with humics. And then are your tote bags, if that's the primary way that you're mobilizing them, how many pounds do those contain?
Yeah, so tote bags are 2,000 pounds, 1 ton. We do not see any differences in handling with Rhizosorb compared to traditional MAP fertilizer. So it's not going to take on moisture. It's in a warehouse, in a humid warehouse. It's going to take on some moisture just like MAP would. Really no difference there. So you want to keep
blending concerns at all as far as separation and transport or anything?
No, the metal oxide is essentially solubilized in the phosphoric acid and incorporated into the granule. So it's not going to separate. You're not going to see any, coating or anything like that. It's not a coated material. So it's a very stable product. We've moved thousands of tons over the last couple of years, all over the country, and in fact, worldwide. We've got trials, multiple countries around the world. So again, if you're used to handling MAP and DAP, continue to handle it the same way, and you're not going to have any problems.
Thank you.
Yeah, tote bags we do have. I would say primary way we move it is bulk, but we do have tote bags available for those that want to try smaller quantities.
Sam, I seen you were unmuted.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of trials, and it seems pretty positive. Is there things that you found that is scenarios that you wouldn't recommend it in? Is it certain seed genetics, or is it certain soils? I know you said it works wide variety, but is there certain items that maybe right now that, you know, you'd give a fair warning to say, maybe caution a little?
I would say the only scenario would be if you're in pHs under 4 or 5, probably not a fit. And for two reasons. One, you need to fix that pH before you really consider phosphate fertilizers. And two, the metal oxides will tend to resolubilize at that level and tend to break down. So that's really the only scenario we've seen it not perform statistically the same as standard practice.
Any other closing questions here? I'll remind everybody, if you want to proceed on this and watching the recording, or you're here live, get a hold of me. When I think Craig wanted to talk options here, I'm going to shut off the recording when you talk to that degree, though, Craig. So if you got any other questions, I'm going to shut off the recording, and then we can have some pre-conversation here. So,
Ryan Gibbs here. I do got a quick question. A lot of talk about mycorrhiza fungi, AMF. Talked to numerous guys this winter, no-till conference and places, saying that where they are applying phosphorus, their AMF levels are going down on their soil biology test. And then I was at a speaking event this winter where I believe it was South Dakota Independent Farm Research did like a 5-year study on MAP application, phosphorus, and they did multiple application rates trying to build, and where they applied phosphorus, the more phosphorus they applied, the lower the mycorrhiza fungi was, and the less they applied, the more mycorrhiza fungi. And people who are, I guess, are in the regen ag industry are big on mycorrhiza and how it is used to enhance phosphorus uptake. So my question is, with your phosphorus product, are you doing any research, or have you, on the levels of mycorrhiza in the soil in connection with phosphorus applications with your phosphorus product?
Yeah, great question. And I'm not a mycorrhizal expert. It's something that we have discussed with our R&D team, but you know, as a startup, your budgets are limited and there's only so much you can look at. So I'll say an ex-practicing agronomist, I think it would be something totally cool to look at and something we should, you know, study, but it's just currently not in our budget or timeline. So I can't really comment further on impact to that. It's not something we've looked at. We have studied interactions with other biologicals, and while we haven't studied everyone under the sun, so far we've seen no negative interaction with biology. But again, we just haven't studied at enough detail to definitively say what's going on there.
Okay, thank you.